We will be discussing this concept basically in much more detail throughout the semester. So familiarizing yourself with the word anatomy. Whenever you hear the word anatomy, you should remember vocabulary, terminology, and relationship between those terminologies. For instance, if I discuss the concept of heart, in a sense of anatomy, I can say your heart is located in the mediastinum cavity, is surrounded by your two lungs. It has four chambers, two atria and two ventricles, and it has a specific blood vessels attached to it. Now, if I take that concept and I want to discuss it in a sense of physiology, physiology will be focusing on the functions associated with different parts of the body. Going back to the example I told you earlier, if I'm referring to your heart, when we're talking about the physiological aspect of it, I can tell you that the heart requires electrical impulses, and the electrical impulses are created by ion movements that leads to muscle contraction, and muscle contraction leads to your heart actually pumping blood to the rest of the body. Other examples of physiology include what makes you hungry, what makes you thirsty, how does your body produce urine, how do you digest food, how do you absorb food, how does your nervous system work, what makes you able to see, etc., etc. Now, going back to the anatomy and looking at the subcategories of anatomy, we have two main categories: gross or macroscopic anatomy, macro implying large, which is discussing concepts or terminology associated with large enough structures that are going to be visible with the naked eye. So typically, when you are performing some sort of dissection, whether it be cadaver, cat, fetal pig, the structures that are going to be visible to you, like your heart, like your blood vessels, lungs, kidneys, intestines, all of these are visible with the naked eye and considered to be macroscopic. On the other hand, when we're talking about, when we're talking about gross anatomy, it could be system anatomy, which basically will talk about one of the 11 systems that are present in your body, like cardiovascular, nervous, muscular, urinary, digestive, etc. Or we can talk about surface anatomy when you look at the internal structures and how they relate to the overlying skin. So this is basically we're looking at muscle masses, the veins that are visible or seen on the surface. The third way we can look at it in the sense of gross anatomy is regional anatomy. This is typical to when you are a medical student and they want to teach you basically a region of the body and every possible organ and structure associated with that. For instance, if you are looking in your thoracic cavity, which is basically your chest cavity, they will be discussing about the nervous system, so the nerves in that part. They talk about your lungs, which are part of the respiratory system. They talk about your heart because it's part of the cardiovascular system. They talk about muscles as part of muscular system. But because they're part of the region of the body called the thoracic cavity, all of these systems are going to be included, but part of each of the systems. Now, when we're talking about anatomy in a sense of microscopic, the word microscopic is a big hint. Basically, this is going to be small enough structures that are not going to be visible with the naked eye. And as a result, you probably do need some sort of equipment, typically a microscope, to be able to carry out the activity of anatomy. Now, when we're looking at cells within the microscopic anatomy, we refer to that science as cytology. Cyte implies cell, and the ology part of it basically means a study of. And histology, anytime you hear it, and we will discuss some in more detail when we do labs, is histology referring to a study of tissue. You can also look at anatomy in the sense of developmental anatomy, which basically you go through different stages of life and see how the body system are changing as the person basically goes through different stages of life, from the moment of birth all the way going to before birth all the way to basically adulthood and older age. Now, when we look at physiology and the breakdown for physiology, we can look at them based on organ system, which is a typical approach we take. So we can look at cardiovascular physiology and discuss anything that's associated with heart and blood vessels and blood. Or we can take urinary system and basically discuss any functions associated with your kidney, ureter, bladder, and urethra. And this type of division, we usually focus on both cell and molecular levels of the body. In a different level. And in this case, basically, we are looking at how individual cells are going to basically carry out their chemical reactions. Now, if you want to understand physiology properly, you need to have good understanding of chemistry in general. Because basically what makes you an alive individual, basically what makes you a living organism, is all of the chemical reactions and chemical changes that happens in your body. Chemical changes are responsible for creation of electrical current, building up pressure, and moving ions and molecules from one location to another. So these are extremely important. We also talk about physical concepts. So physics is also another component. So thinking about the lenses, thinking about the air pressure that allows you basically to breathe air in and out, are also associated with the physical component of physiology. Now, if we want to discuss the process of creating a living organism, we refer to something known as a structural organization, which basically implies that we're going to be building from the smallest molecule all the way to the full organism. So the most basic structure we have is referred to as chemical level. And as the word chemical implies, that means we're talking about the smallest amount at the level of chemistry. So atoms, molecules, and in some cases, if we combine atoms and molecules together, we get something called organelles. These are really small, not visible with the naked eye. And again, this is at the chemical level. Now, if I combine the chemical level together, I'm basically building up the next level. So if I combine different different molecules and atoms together, what I would get to a higher level referred to as cellular level. So as the word cellular implies, we're talking about a single cell. So cells can be, let's say, your skin cells, it can be your hair cells, your nerve cells, your heart cells, etc., etc. Now, if I put a group of cells together, and the identical cells, and give them a job to do, what I create is a tissue. For instance, if I put a bunch of smooth muscle cells together, what I will get is a smooth muscle tissue. If I put a bunch of skin cells together, I get a skin tissue. If I put a bunch of cardiac muscle cells together, I will get cardiac muscle tissue. Now, if I take these different tissues and combine them together, I will get to the higher level, or level number 4, which is referred to as organ level. Organ level is defined as 2 or more type of tissue basically working together to make it possible for an action to be completed. For instance, if I'm taking a look at your heart is made up of muscle tissue, which we refer to as cardiac muscle tissue. It is made up of connective tissue, which I will discuss with you in more detail. It is made up of epithelial tissue, which is similar to what you have your skin made up of. And combination of these 2 different tissues, as well as nerve tissue, will bring you an organ, which we refer to it as heart. Now, within the organ, using your organ and combining that organ with other organs in the same system will create something known as organ system. So in an organ system, you have multiple organs working together with a shared task. For instance, Going back to the example of the cardiovascular system, if I combine your heart, your blood vessels, and blood, what I will get is cardiovascular system. If I take your lung, your trachea, your nose, your air passageway, put them all together, I will get your respiratory system, and etc., etc. Now, if I take all of the organ systems that I have and combine them together, what I will get is a full organism, a complete living organism that allows all of these organs to function beautifully with each other and basically create a whole living organism. Here is a picture that defines what I'm discussing. So we're starting with atoms and molecules, which forks our way to the organelles. So everything you see on that part, on the top part of the pictures, atoms, molecules, and organelles represent your chemical levels. These molecules and atoms are combined together to form your cellular level, which the example is providing for you as a smooth muscle cell. A collection of the smooth muscle cells together form your smooth muscle tissue. And taking the smooth muscle tissue, combining it with connective tissue and epithelial tissue will give you your blood vessel. And yes, blood vessel is an organ. Take the blood vessel, combine it with blood, and your heart, which you see, creates your organ system called cardiovascular system. And if we combine all of your systems together and wrap a skin around it, you get your organismal level, which is basically a living, breathing organism. Now, when we're talking about a human, or actually any living organism, there are specific characteristics that are required for basically surviving and living a normal life. Those include maintaining boundaries, movement, responsiveness, digestion, metabolism, excretion, reproduction, and growth. So what we're going to do is we're going to go briefly over each of these components and understand what each of these words mean. Starting with maintaining your boundaries. So the maintaining of your boundary, if you're looking at it in the sense of gross anatomy, that would be basically the skin that separates your body from the outside environment. You also can think about it in a microscopic level and think about it in the sense of plasma membrane that basically sets boundaries for each cells. Movement. Muscular system in your body allows you to move, but that movement is created because of the contraction of the muscular tissue. But you could also have movement in a sense of your cell moving from one area to another, or one body part moving from one location to another location. So basically walking, using your skeletal muscle. Responsiveness. This is basically put is if you have an action, reaction. So you respond to the stimuli that are present in your environment. For instance, if you touch something hot or sharp, you reflexively pull your hand away to prevent any sort of injuries. If you are exercising, your breathing rate will go up, so does your heart rate, to make sure that you are receiving enough oxygen to your tissue. Digestion. So basically, simply put, digestion is you consuming your food to get your energy, break down those food that you have consumed to the simplest form of molecules possible, bring those molecules into your blood and use them as a source of energy. Now, to use them as a source of energy, to use these food molecules, these basic molecules coming from your food as a source of energy, is a process known as metabolism. So metabolism, put into simple terms, is any chemical reaction that happens within your body and allows you to survive. Now, the typical way of, or a part of metabolism is a process called catabolism, which basically you take a chunk of molecules and you break them down to smaller molecules, or you take a small molecules through a process called anabolism and you create more complex molecules. For instance, catabolism I can take a piece of bread and break it down to simple sugars, large molecule to small molecule. When that sugar gets into my body, I can carry out a process called anabolism, which when I take that simple version of the sugar and create a more complex and larger molecule called glycogen. Excretion is another process. Excretion is referred to the process done by your urinary system, where you remove the waste products your body has created as a result of either metabolism or digestion. Now, if you're thinking about urinary system, the products are based or as a result of metabolism, and they're typically referred to as urea. Or a typical molecule as a metabolism waste would be urea. You could also have waste product as a result of your metabolism called carbon dioxide. We also have molecules that are created from basically the waste products of digestion, and those are basically fecal matter that gets removed from your body and are identified as unabsorbed food that basically your body could not use as a source of nutrients. Reproduction is the easy one. Basically, if you want to allow your species to continue, you need to be able to pass your genetic information to an offspring. Now, this reproduction can happen in an asexual manner, which means basically no sex cells, or it can happen in the sense of sexual reproduction, where you pass the genetic information between the two parents and create an offspring. Growth, increase in the size or body parts of the organism. I don't think there is really much to talk about that. So basically, if you're growing, you're regenerating new cells, that's basically identified as growth. And that's about it. So I'm gonna stop here and then we'll continue this lecture on the next PowerPoint.